Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so we'll proceed. So we'll start with part one of our presentation, and that's focusing on the technical requirements. So colleagues who would like to tackle.
I'll take that on. So that is among the most common questions in terms of the frequently asked questions we receive in any given cycle where we have notices of funding opportunity open to the public. Just we'll say it many times throughout the day that the whole purpose of the notice of funding opportunity process is that so that there is an open and competitive competition for our funding opportunities. And again, we are with the public diplomacy section here. So I'll flag that we are very much focused on public diplomacy oriented projects and programs. But without further ado, the main thing we can recommend that everybody do seems like very much common sense, but it also seems to be something that is overlooked in the process of completing, developing and submitting an application, and that is read the NOFO. We set out the technical requirements, and that's what we're talking about here in this portion, is that there are specific things we have to have in the application so that our merit review panel can fully review and assess the application, what the intent of the application is, but also the kind of core required documents, a budget narrative, a proposal narrative that outlines things. Those are all the elements that we want to see and have to see. So we have notices of funding opportunity for our what we call our large grants process, as well as our annual program statement. They are different. So whatever the program or notice of funding opportunity that you're responding to, please do review those the elements outlined in those documents. Importantly, we need all information and all questions about the applications to come to us via email at pretoriagrants@state.gov. So that's listed again clearly in our notices of funding opportunity, but we have seen in the past applicants submitting things to grants.gov and other platforms. And so if you do that, you risk missing deadlines and missing the opportunity to be considered. Section D of the notice of funding opportunity is very important because it does again outline those core documents and core items that we need. So again, just to give you a little more direction, focus there, but read the entire thing. You, as an applicant, should register at sam.gov. In order for us to pursue what is called a federal assistance award, our partners have to be registered there. There is a new process in place. So visit that site, review the instructions. There are FAQs on the site. One thing we often see is inquiries to us asking for assistance, but it's not a process that we control here at the embassy. So the best thing to do is to use the resources, the help center on that website, but ensure that you have started that process because it can take some time to complete all the steps. And we are only able to really pursue awards and that kind of partnership through our funding opportunities with those organizations and other entities that meet the requirements of our notice of funding opportunity, but are also registered in those systems. The other thing to kind of flag is that in the notices of funding opportunity, there's the section about our thematic objectives and the strategies that we're trying to implement with the notice of funding opportunity, as well as audiences and the types of organizations who are eligible to apply. So definitely, again, pay attention to those. It can change between notice of funding opportunity because different notices have different objectives. So please do review that and make sure that at the outset, you're not starting down the road of pursuing an application where it might not be a good match for you as an organization or applicant, as well as us on our side when we're reviewing it.
Mark, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just to mention that because we are in the public diplomacy section, we are governed by legislation, United States legislation, and one of the key laws that governs us tells us that we cannot fund for-profit organizations. So any applicants who are not profit, they will not be eligible to receive funding from us. And we've Sometimes there's a bit of a gray area, so if it's not very clear that the applicant is not for profit, please provide proof that of your non-profit status. When we review applications, the first thing that we do is review it for technical eligibility. So, for example, if one of the standard forms is missing, the SF424 or the 424A, we won't review your application any further. So that's why, as Jameson was saying, please read the entire NOFO very carefully, but particularly section D is very, very important because that actually step by step, and if you follow that, you're going to have a full package of what we are looking for. The standard forms, the detailed budget spreadsheet, and the actual proposal, and what we want in the proposal, what we're looking for in the proposal. But most importantly, we are the United States Embassy. A grant that has nothing to do with America, that has no American content, will be technically ineligible.
Great. So Mark actually mentioned part of what's in our next section of our presentation, which is actually talking a little bit more about the substance of the NOFO and what we expect to see in a strong application from eligible organizations. So a lot of people have questions about what makes your grants a public diplomacy grant. Some of the major pitfalls that we've seen in previous NOFO cycles is that we get projects that looked too much like a development program. So we just have to say we're not in the business of development. We definitely want to support our development partners, but with our very limited resources and funding, we do need to focus firmly on the realm of public diplomacy. And so the public diplomacy section of the United States mission to South Africa is seeking proposals that address one or more, of a subset of challenges from a public diplomacy perspective. So the first thing you do need to keep in mind is that you're dealing with public diplomacy. So that means your audience needs to be a public part of South African society. So programs that are focused on training for government officials, training for the police, civil servants, anything that doesn't really address an audience that would be considered the general public, those will not be eligible for consideration. So with our public diplomacy funding, we're looking for grants that promote partnerships and information or knowledge exchange between US citizens and South Africans, South African publics and institutions, with the goal of enabling more effective mutual beneficial cooperation between our two countries. This is benefiting the US national interest and national security, as well as that of South Africa. Our section aims to identify and fund programs and projects that broaden and deepen dialogue and empower cooperation between American citizens and institutions, and including civil society and educational organizations and their South African counterparts. So again, we are connecting South African people with US citizens. We are connecting South African institutions with US institutions. So that's really is at the core of what we would consider public diplomacy grants. And just to kind of sum it up again, all of the awards need to be benefiting specific audiences within South Africa, and our NOFO for each kind of sub theme that you'll see in the NOFOs, it mentions several of those audiences that we are specifically trying to target, whether that is unemployed youth, whether that's women entrepreneurs, or different disadvantaged or marginalized communities. Again, just to circle back to what we were saying is please read the NOFO, because the NOFO will explicitly say the different audiences that we are trying to engage with our funding. And just to sum this up, again, we will not fund projects that solely benefit government entities. So again, I use the example of training for police officers or training for civil servants, and nor will we fund grants that benefit for-profit entities. This really is about supporting the South African public. So our next question is, this is a frequently asked question, is what is American content? And does anyone want to tackle that?
Thank you, Heather. So all proposals must have a strong and Central American element. And this means connections beyond just having the U.S. Embassy speak at an activity or something like that, but really about ways that promote increased understanding of U.S. values, perspectives, as well as policies amongst South African audiences. The great thing about working here in South Africa is that we are both, the United States and South Africa are both strong, vibrant democracies. So that sort of element of the work and the audience engagement allows for a number of different ways to engage. We, of course, want the applications to demonstrate what that means for the applicant's organization. And so we are not very prescriptive in terms of that element, because it can involve some creativity. That's part of the reason why we're putting out a very broad public notice for funding opportunity, is that we don't always know the broad variety of avenues for engagement that are out there. We have our objectives, and we're looking for those kind of partnerships that advance those goals, both for us as well as the partner that we are working with through our award program. So that's the core of it. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they have anything else they'd like to highlight.
Was it pretty clear? Yeah.
So I think the next thing is definitely a question we get is, what makes a proposal successful? I'll turn that back to Heather.
Okay, again, a common refrain you will hear from us is please read the NOFO and be familiar with the different themes and audiences that we specify in the NOFO. You'll see that there are multiple notices of funding opportunities, and they are not the same. So we have the annual program statement, the APS, which is for smaller sums of money, and then the large NOFO cycle. They have different closing dates, and they have slightly different audiences and themes. So it's very important that you are paying attention to what NOFO you are applying to, and that your proposals are actually geared to one of the goals and objectives and audience pools that we are seeking to engage. So, we get several very strong proposals, and they're for very commendable types of work, but they are not related to any of the goals that we have mentioned in either of the notices. We will not consider those further. So it's very important for you to kind of take stock of what your organization is doing and what it seeks to do, and how it actually relates to some of the goals that we've set forth for ourselves. And just make sure you're aligning your goals with our goals, or drawing those connections for us if it's not clearly evident to us in the first place. So that's really the core of it for what's a successful proposal. And then I would just like to say, just because your proposal was not selected doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with it. It just really meant that it was a competitive cycle, and we had limited resources to be able to fund a limited number of awards. So it's not to say that there was anything wrong with your proposal or that it was off the mark. It's just that it is a competitive process. And we don't get to fund everything that we get, all of the proposals that we receive. So another important part of what makes a strong proposal is the sustainability aspect of it. The U.S. mission to South Africa cannot fund projects indefinitely. So a strong proposal will include some indication or information on what happens after the award is done, whether it's a one-off, which is completely fine, or if you are looking at creating some other sustainable partnership. We are interested in understanding what happens on the back end of the award. and again, in your crystal ball, of course, we know that this is all, you can't predict the future, but we do want to know that that thought has been part of the process. And then, you know, it should be evident to us that your organizations and the programs can exist without our funding. So this means that your organization has to have the proper accounting and other structures in place for monitoring and evaluation, and it cannot solely be reliant on the U.S. mission to South Africa to operate. And another aspect of a strong proposal is novelty. So we rarely fund the same proposal twice, and that's related to the sustainability aspect, but it's also related to, we have a limited amount of money, and we are trying to target a broad array of issues and audiences. So we are looking for programs and projects that haven't been done before. And then perhaps that's really kind of the proof of concept for, you know, a future project through a different organization or something like that. So definitely think about creativity and how to create something new that might spark interest among our first line of evaluators. And so then there's always the question about funding and how many proposals will get funded, or how many proposals will be considered to be successful. And again, just to reiterate, it is a competitive process. Not everyone is going to get funded. There will be wonderful proposals that we receive that we will fully read and fully consider, but just through the competitive process, they won't, you know, pass cross the finish line, so to speak. In terms of the number, it varies year to year depending on the availability of funds. But I think we can say comfortably, like typically there's 3 to 4 proposals from the annual program statement, and 2 to 3 proposals from the large grants notice of funding opportunity. So I don't know if you have anything you add.
Yeah, often get requests after we've made our selection, and applicants who submitted really great proposals, and they would like to have personalized, detailed feedback on their proposal. When we get over 100 applications, it just becomes virtually impossible to give that. I know you would like to hear feedback. Why was my wonderful project not funded? Well, as Heather's just pointed out, we've got 100 really good applications, and we've got funding for 3. Your application may be brilliant, but unfortunately, it wasn't as good as the ones that we did select, or we didn't like it as much for whatever reason. We also get people saying, can we have one-on-one, you know, sessions before the competition is closed? Give us some more guidance. That would be unfair. We have to be open and transparent. This is an open and fair competition, and we just don't have the capacity to give that kind of one-on-one guidance, because if we gave it to one applicant, we'd have to give it to every single applicant to be fair to everybody. So it's a lot of work to submit a good proposal. We really do appreciate that. And it's a tough competition. I mean, so if you don't get funded, it's no, as Heather said, it's no poor reflection on your application. It's just simply that it's very, very competitive. Just one thing, I don't know if we mentioned that if you do have questions at any stage, please type in your questions in the chat box. And then after our presentation, we will see how many of those we can actually answer. So feel free to start typing your questions if you want.
Absolutely. And I think we just have about 3 more elements that we wanted to cover, and we will get to the check box shortly. Definitely. So another kind of question that comes up is about organizations based in the United States wanting to work with South African partners, or South African partners wanting to work with other organizations from outside South Africa, but working with it. So essentially, while we are speaking broadly about our notices of funding opportunity, we do, as Heather mentioned, have 2 that are live and active right now that we're trying to definitely clarify questions about. One is the annual program statement, so that is a smaller grants, and so that is very much focused on South African not-for-profit organizations or non-government organizations. And then the larger grant NOFO, for those that visit it and read about it, you'll see that it is for larger sums and larger, more comprehensive projects. And so that is open to US and South African NPOs or nonprofit organizations or non-government organizations. So the goal there is that with all of those activities, the significant activities must take place in South Africa, and the primary audience must be South African in either case, because we are trying to again build those ties between the United States and South Africa. So it does make sense that there might be a South African organization that says, you know, we're doing this really great project here. We met an American from an NGO in the United States working on very similar things, and we'd love to have support that would allow us to bring our expertise together to solve this problem or address this issue. And so that's the kind of relationships that we're trying to encourage again with these funding opportunities. So those are the kind of relationships that can be built and supported through the notices of funding opportunity. Again, it just depends on the case you make in that application, how that links to our strategic objectives, and that's what we're looking for.
And so that kind of touches on the question that Jennifer is asking in the chat box. Can the U.S. partner be the lead applicant? The U.S. partner can only be the lead applicant for the large no-vote cycle. So those are like, you know, the 100,000 plus grant proposals that are coming in. We will consider a U.S. nonprofit organization as the lead partner only for the large no-vote. And so then our next question that we get often is about whether or not an MPO can partner with the South African government or with the private sector, you know, in their proposal. And so the short answer to that is as long as it makes sense for your proposal, and as long as your organization, the lead applicant nonprofit organization, is separate and distinct from the private sector partner. So you're not a pass-through, you're not an ancillary part, you know, a project of a for-profit entity or a front for a for-profit entity. So we definitely have successful applications that are using private sector partners as subcontractors, or that receive in-kind support or donations from the South African government or from a for-profit entity. It's just that the money will be going to the nonprofit organization, and the expectation is that the nonprofit organization is the main implementer and the real kind of brain trust and power behind the grant. And so then the final question that we often get is about the forms. So, you know, we understand that the forms are not always the most user-friendly, and what should you do if you are struggling with the forms? So the first line of defense is a website, www.grants.gov, that offers tutorials and other resources for applicants on how to fill out those applications. If you do find that you're still experiencing some difficulty filling out those forms, like the SF424 or SF424A, please email us at pretoriagrants.gov. I'm sorry, pretoriagrants@state.gov, and then we will see what technical assistance we can provide in that regard. Okay, so I think that's it for our boilerplate Q&A. And so we can take some more questions from the chat. Okay.
Great. So we have a question that says, our organization provides life skills training and meals during holidays to children in low-income communities. The work we do is very valuable and keeps the children in our communities from getting caught up in gangs or exposed to danger. We are desperately needing funding to keep going. If we show American movies, would this qualify as an American angle? So two things kind of come up, and we touched on them separately in different questions above. First, that our funding is usually not sufficient to sustain the overall operations for an organization. The applicants should have, you know, the structures in place, whether it's accounting and other elements that an organization needs to operate and be able to fund those operations independent of our support. Our support really should be, you know, that difference maker where it's bringing in that American element. To the second part there about would showing American movies qualify as an American angle, I would say that back to kind of what we were discussing regarding that strong and Central American component, it sounds to me like in this situation that not to prejudge, right? Because that's not the purpose of this this call and this opportunity to answer some questions. But the fact of the matter is, it sounds like from this example, the core work is keeping children fed, keeping children off the streets, and is the American movie a core element of that?